Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where a few of you, a very vocal few of you, are tired of hearing about Wonder Woman, even though I only reference it when it's appropriate. But if you're tired of it, imagine how studio executives feel, because every creative in Hollywood is using Wonder Woman in their pitches. Why is that? Let's touch on that first. And that's because, as we discuss all the time, Hollywood is very risk averse. So there are a lot of projects that are Wonder Woman-esque that haven't been greenlit or prioritized because they were considered a risk. But then here comes Wonder Woman, which, thankfully got made. DC and Warner Brothers found themselves in a unique position where they were trying to compete with Marvel, and they have a character that's one of their big three, and so they decided to make a movie about her, right? And it turned out fabulous. So now everybody who was waiting in the wings is like, it's not a risk anymore. It's still a risk, by the way, because Patty Jenkins, that was just like, I don't even know if Patty Jenkins can do that again. Lightning really struck once. Speaking of lightning with Wonder Woman, but it struck, and to recreate that experiment, I think is going to be very, very difficult. So, but still, you can't ignore all the money that Wonder Woman made, $821 million worldwide. So everybody's walking into pitch meetings, or having their agent call up studio executives and say, "Move my project forward. I have the next Wonder Woman." And one of those people name-checking Wonder Woman is James Mangold, as he tries to get his X23 movie to move ahead. Now, it's on the board. They said they're working on the script right now, but I'm sure that, Fox hasn't given it a release date, so Fox is probably like, let's see how it turns out. So James Mangold is more than happy to say, I've got baby Wonder Woman over here. And again, in a recent interview, he did point out specifically that Patty Jenkins as Wonder Woman showed how big a movie X23 could be. So he's trying to sell Hollywood on it because, it was in an industry trade, and he's trying to sell audiences on it. Although I told you, at some point we're going to hit a Wonder Woman backlash. I predict when it gets Oscar nominated, probably over Logan, by the way, and we'll see if it can survive the backlash. That'll be tough. Although I have to say, I think Patty Jenkins sometimes comes across not so nice. I think Gal Gadot obviously seems like such a nice person. You can't stay angry at her. So I would use her as my secret weapon if I were Warner Brothers to combat such a potential backlash. And people really like Dafne Keen too, the actress who played X23, and that's going to help, I think, as well. Now, Logan certainly made money at the box office. It's no small fry. It's not as much as Wonder Woman, and it's not going to make the top 10 for the year, but still, it pulled in $616 million. Hugh Jackman, by the way, also, they're starting to, interestingly enough, these interviews spun out of, Fox pushing Logan for awards season, although they made it clear that their really big, strong awards push is going to be Patrick Stewart for Best Supporting. I can see him getting a Golden Globe nomination. I would be surprised if he got an Oscar nomination, but let's see. But Hugh Jackman said there's no way he's returning to the character, and he's not even going to produce any films going forward. And he fully expects the role to be recast. But since Wolverine's death was such a crucial part of X23's development as a character in the movies, they can't bring the character back with her around, even with a different actor. So that could potentially be a problem for an X23 movie. They're like, we'd love to continue with Dafne Keen as X23, but Wolverine makes a lot more money. They don't want to have a problem like Marvel is having in the comics. I don't know if you heard this story, but Marvel has tried very much to diversify their lineup, and they're actually backtracking from that. That's the whole point of the legacy storyline that's happening right now. But they have Lady Thor, and they have Ironheart, a female Iron Man, basically. And behind the scenes at New York Comic Con, the rumor is that Marvel had a meeting with comic book retailers, and that it was very heated, and actually screaming broke out because the retailers are very upset with these changes to the lineup, and they say the comics aren't selling as a result. Which is pretty disheartening. I think perhaps Marvel did too much too quickly, and then also as people have said, why don't you just create new characters rather than changing characters that already exist and have a fan base? I think there's something to be said for that. So that's a problem. However, another thing, if I were James Mangold, I'd say not only is Wonder Woman a success, but look at Stranger Things and It, which also feature kids. Let's have our kid X-Men movie. And if it's cheap, if I were, I think I'd have to decide what I was going to do about Wolverine if I were Fox before I decided to move forward with the X23 movie. Do I really want the new Wolverine to be a woman, you know, and because of the way James Mangold set it up, and perhaps in hindsight this was a mistake, you can't have this Dafne Keen X23 and have a Wolverine. And again, Wolverine I think is worth a lot more money. So, you know, I would maybe say I'm sorry, and then I'd recast Wolverine and try and do something with that, no matter how cheap this movie would be. Maybe if I wanted to take some time, maybe if they could do the X23 movie quickly, I'd perhaps float it out there and see how it did, but I wouldn't want to potentially do damage to the Wolverine brand either. It's very tricky. Also, let's see how New Mutants does. I predict not well. Hopefully the new trailer will be better. By the way, I don't know if you noticed, but everybody who did a poster frame for the New Mutants trailer had to put the New Mutants logo in it where it says New Mutants, because there was not a single still frame in the entire trailer that said, you know, visually, this is a New Mutants movie. And that was a really bad thing. So I think they're going to see how that does in terms of cheap films and, you know, not just focusing on one single character. Although that would be the case with X23. But I'm curious, do you want to see an X23 movie? Do you think a Wonder Woman movie success means that there would be with X23? And if you had to pick, talk about a Sophie's choice, do you want Dafne Keen to continue as X23? Or do you want to have a new actor cast as Wolverine? Hugh Jackman, by the way, what a gentleman. He told a story in the interview about how Dougray Scott, who was originally cast in the role of Wolverine, was so nice to him when they met up because, you know, Dougray Scott, Mission Impossible 2's filming went long, so he couldn't take on the role. I don't think he would have been as good. But he was very gracious to Hugh Jackman, who apologized and said, I'm so sorry how this turned out. And Dougray Scott was like, that's the business. And Hugh Jackman said, he said, I know it'll be hard, but I hope to be as gracious to the next actor who takes on the claws. My words, not his, but I think that was just a lovely sentiment. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, speaking of actor problems, the second is that Ben Mendelsohn finds himself in a hard spot because he's working consistently. Isn't that wonderful? He's such a quirky, crazy guy that I'm so glad that he's finding a lot of work. But it's always as the villain. He's almost like the new Alan Rickman, although Alan Rickman never worked so much. But Alan Rickman, you know, rest in peace, didn't really work during the heyday in Hollywood of blockbusters. I mean, he was obviously in Die Hard. He was phenomenal, made his career, and he was in the Harry Potter films, but you know, in a very small role. But you know, it's not like today where there's just so many big movies that they have to reuse actors. I don't think they have to. They could find new ones, but you know, again, Hollywood is risk averse. So Ben Mendelsohn has carved out quite a career for himself as a professional villain. He, of course, was amazing in Rogue One, although his white cape did a lot of the work there. He's in the upcoming Robin Hood. Speaking of Alan Rickman, taking on the role of Sheriff of Nottingham, and if anyone can top Alan Rickman in the Kevin Costner Robin Hood, it would be Ben Mendelsohn. And he's also the villain in Spielberg's Ready Player One. And now he's in talks to be the villain, the head Skrull in Marvel's Captain Marvel movie. And the reason he's the frontrunner is because he previously worked on a small little movie called Mississippi Grind with Ryan Reynolds for directors Ryan Fleck and Anna Boden, who are helming Captain Marvel. And so they're like, he's our guy. We've already worked with him. I mean, it's not like, I don't know. Part of me says Ben Mendelsohn doesn't need the work, but maybe he does, you know, like he's not getting lead roles, so his career is kind of like stalled. So if he doesn't keep working in this capacity, maybe he'd just disappear, right? It's tough. So they're like, we want to use him. Now, as a Skrull, it would probably be largely motion capture voice work, maybe, or maybe it would be makeup like Mystique. You know, you think, what does it matter who plays the shapeshifter, right? But as the head of the Skrulls, maybe he wouldn't shapeshift as much. And then also it makes a huge difference, as we've discovered, as to which actress plays Mystique. Also, good luck to any actor who has to mimic Ben Mendelsohn, you know, his Skrull, because, you know, sometimes you're still the shapeshifter will still look like who they're impersonating, but they'll drop the acting of the being like that other character. And it's really cool. Like, for instance, True Blood. I'll never forget. That's the best I've ever seen of shapeshifters, actors having to act like other actors. It was amazing. It was, I forget the name of the actors, but it was Sam, the bartender owner. And that actor did an amazing job acting like the other actor who was impersonating him. It was a thing to behold. And I've never seen that, in fact, on the big screen. Although I would like to say on a side note that in the comics, in the original comics, and we'll talk about changing the source material with the viewer question, but the head of the Skrulls in the comic book storyline was a woman. It was a queen. Maybe that would be the case. Maybe because this takes place in the 90s, it would be a male leader. And then when they pick up whatever the ramifications are, Secret Invasion in the current timeline in the MCU, the queen will be there. So maybe so that makes sense, I guess. I forgot about the time difference. And also maybe they don't want to have a female villain with a female lead superhero. You want to balance it out. That makes sense. I would understand that. So what do you think of Ben Mendelsohn? I think it's uninspired, but he's such a great actor and I'm such a fan of his work that I just want him to continue as well. All right, so for the third story of the day, this one's very interesting. Netflix really ticked off a lot of anime fans with their live-action Death Note movie, which I liked. But again, I've never seen the Death Note anime, and I felt that this was I thought it was as good as an adaptation as I've seen of a series, and condensing it down into just a feature-length movie. It's very hard to do. And while the Death Note certainly had problems, I particularly found the ending very compelling to the movie version that Netflix made. But they're looking to make it up to anime fans, and I'd be curious to see if they can, with some upcoming anime that they're going to be putting on Netflix, and they're putting a real injection of money into the anime industry, which apparently in Japan struggles. They have a hard time turning a profit over there. So as we've discussed, Netflix is spending $80 billion on original content in 2018, original content and acquisitions. And so far, they said they have 30 anime projects somewhere in development or production, but 12 have been ordered to series, and they're doing a Godzilla anime feature as well. And some of them will be produced in Japan and some will not. Because if it's produced in Japan, it's an acquisition, I think they feel, not an in-house original content. I don't know how that's the case, but we'll see. And some people in some of the Japanese anime houses have said, this is amazing for us because Netflix, for instance, can pay for all the dubbing in all the different languages and give us a global exposure that we couldn't afford to do on our own. So that's pretty amazing. But I was reading the coverage on this and I got an amazing quote from an anime giant, Keiichi Hara, who really gave an amazing quote about just, I think, working in business in general. So he said, I work on commercial productions, so inevitably I get directions from companies like TV networks about the story, etc. Basically, those are called studio notes. So when I was young, I used to get really mad about it. But working out ways to keep those people happy has been the source of some really great ideas. That kind of pressure actually helps creativity in some ways. Wow, what a positive attitude, Hara. You're amazing. If I were a studio executive, I'd love you. Instead of complaining, that's right, why not understand where the studio executive is coming from, saying, hey, I have boxes that need to be checked, and you want another season, don't you? So Hara clearly is someone who understands the dynamic of that relationship and makes it work to his advantage. I think that's fabulous. I mean, sometimes you get a studio executive who just doesn't know what they're doing, but that's life. In any job, sometimes your boss doesn't know what they're doing. So it's up to you to figure a way to work around it and hopefully eventually fix the situation. All right, so I think this is very exciting. I would really like to see this lead to a popularity of animation for adults in the West. We've discussed that a lot. I think there was some progress made with the second Airbender series in particular, but then of course that went away. I think Nickelodeon, partially because of what the creators decided to do with the introducing an LGBT storyline for the leads. But speaking of Airbender, I don't know why Netflix hasn't gone there. Maybe there's no interest, I don't know. But they're starting an Airbender comic to follow Korra. So I'd be like, why won't you if I was Netflix, I'd be like, I have 80 billion. There's certainly a check big enough to convince you to do the series again on Netflix. And I think it would do very well. And if they didn't want to do Korra, they could do another character in the mythology. Go somewhere else, go back in time. I would love that. But I think that's very, very exciting. So I'm interested to see these. Castlevania, I missed it. I was traveling when Castlevania debuted. And if you don't catch these Netflix series right away, it's hard to cover them. But that did very well on Netflix, so I can see why they want to continue. And so I think this is a very exciting development as an animation fan in general. And I'm curious what you think, and also for those of you who are Death Note fans, can you forgive Netflix? All right, so those are the three stories of the day. And I have a viewer question from Stephen Malavosky. And Stephen says, viewer question. Hello, Grace. Greetings from Macedonia. That is so cool. Hello. I am not a comic book reader, though I have read Watchmen and some DC stuff like Batman, Superman, and The Flash. Oh, that's awesome. You've dipped a toe into the comic book waters. It's a great place. You should dive in. So Stephen continues saying, you have mentioned that most comic book movies like Days of Future Past or Captain America Civil War, for example, are changing 90% from the source material in the adaptation. So my question is, Stephen continues, is why do filmmakers find it so difficult to do a more faithful adaptation of the story that's in the comic book? Thank you in advance if you decide to answer my question. Great question, and very timely, because Thor Ragnarok is currently playing in theaters overseas and will soon open here in the United States, and they've taken tremendous liberties with not only the mythology of the Thor comics, but also, of course, the Planet Hulk storyline. And, you know, you partially answered your own question, Stephen, because you yourself said, I'm not a comic book reader. So a lot of people have read these classic, fabulous comic book stories. And that's why when there are books, they stay much closer. You know, also, someone like J.K. Rowling, you know, you have an individual creator, and that creator is like, I'm not going to sign the deal unless you give me, you know, creative, you know, oversight, and you have to follow my books. So part of the reason like a series like Harry Potter, a film series like Harry Potter is so faithful is because of the J.K. Rowling deal, and also because of the legion of fans who want to see exactly what they read and loved brought to life on the big screen. So that's why they're very faithful there. But that is not the case with comic books. You don't have a single creator. Well, they don't own the material. It's the property of the publisher. So the publisher is like, I just want this to be successful. And the publisher doesn't even own it. It's actually owned in-house because now both publishers are owned by the movie studios that, of course, distribute their films. So they're like, we're doing it. And nobody can say anything else, right? And then, of course, there's not a huge number of people, certainly not enough to make a dent in the box office, that know and love the original source material and are going to be upset if it's not followed to the letter. So that does not create a need to follow the source material. Now, you would think that maybe they would just want to because the source material is so good. But here's the further problem. Most of the people who make the movies are not fans of the comic books either. So they've never read the comic book story. They don't care about it. It doesn't mean anything to them. And so they're like, I don't have to do this. I don't have to adapt this faithfully. And I don't want to because I'm a creative individual and I want to put my own stamp on it. I have my own ideas of how I'd like to see this progress. And then also when you have cinematic universes, another problem is that the groundwork isn't always laid correctly, right? They're like, for Civil War, for instance, they're like, we haven't done any of the groundwork that set up the comic book, so we can't go into that. Or our characters find themselves in different situations than they were in the comic leading into this story. So that further complicates things. I would like to see them be more faithful, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's just the reality of the situation. So I'm not upset about it. I understand it. I think we're getting good stuff. But this is one of the reasons sometimes it's like, well, why don't you just come up with totally new stories and just, you know, leave those other stories alone rather than just like ripping them apart and taking little bits and pieces here and there. For instance, the Doctor Strange movie wasn't based on any comics. It was just the character, and I thought that was fabulous. I thought that was amazing. Same with Winter Soldier, by the way. I mean, they took the idea that they had I think very smartly about what happened to Bucky, but they changed a whole lot about that story. Oh, so I guess that is the same situation. But still, and again, I didn't read that one, so I guess that's why it didn't bother me. So you can see the situation. All right, so I'm curious to how you feel about it. Do you understand the reality of the situation? What would you do if you were at the studio? You know, and what do you think of, you know, would you care as the studio, and would you try and hire talent that did care about the source material? It's just a shame that more people don't read comics, and they're still not, even though they love the movies. It's so frustrating. Comic books are such a wonderful story format, and they've done so much for the comic book industry. It's sad to see that it's just a one-way street instead of them helping each other out. All right, so anyway, that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, Stephen's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions, of course, that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.